My relatives laughed when they got the inheritance, and I only got my grandma's old quilt. My name's Simon. I'm 42, and I've spent my entire life in Nebraska, where the wind howls and people joke as roughly as a tractor idling. I work as a mechanic at the local garage in town and live alone in a small house on the outskirts. My folks? Mom passed away when I was 20, and Dad moved to Florida about 10 years ago, living with his new wife, fishing all day, and not really caring much about family matters. Last month, in March of 2024, my grandmother Edna passed away. Not exactly unexpected at 93, but still hit me harder than I thought it would. We weren't the closest family in the world, but Grandma Edna always had a soft spot for me. At least that's what I thought until the reading of her will. We all gathered at her old farmhouse, a place that stood against prairie winds for nearly a century. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was a skinny guy with glasses who spoke like he was constantly afraid of being interrupted. The whole family was there. Aunt Marge with her husband Phil, Uncle Bob who drove in from Iowa, Cousin Travis with his new wife who was clearly uncomfortable being there, and a few other relatives who I honestly only see at funerals and Thanksgiving when they can't avoid it. The farmhouse smelled like it always did, a mix of old wood, lavender sachets, and something indefinably grandma. You know that smell. Everyone was sitting around awkwardly, making small talk about the weather and gas prices, while waiting for the formal proceedings to begin. Mr. Peterson finally cleared his throat and started reading the will. The big stuff came first. Aunt Marge inherited the farmhouse. No surprise there, since she'd been hinting for years about how much she loved the place. Uncle Bob got Grandma's savings, which I heard later was about $43,000. Not a fortune, but not bad for a woman who'd lived through the Depression and never trusted banks completely. Cousin Travis scored her pickup truck, a 2010 Ford that still ran pretty well despite the rust on the fenders. Then came my turn. I wasn't expecting much, maybe her old TV or some kitchen appliances. What I got instead was a single item. To my grandson Simon, I leave my handmade quilt from 1937. The room went silent for about 3 seconds before the laughter started. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was a kind of laughter that has an edge to it, the kind that's partly at your expense. Aunt Marge snorted first. "Simon, your treasure? Keep your feet warm in winter," she said, not even trying to hide her amusement. Travis, who just inherited a perfectly good truck, added, "Maybe you can sell it on eBay. Some hipster might give you $1 for it." Mr. Peterson awkwardly handed me the quilt. It was folded neatly in a plastic storage bag, looking exactly like what it was, an old, patched-together blanket that had seen better days. The pattern was faded, with squares of different fabrics sewn together by hand. It looked like it had been made during the Dust Bowl by candlelight, which, according to family stories, it probably was. I stood there holding this piece of cloth while my relatives continued their not-so-subtle jokes. My cheeks burned, not just from embarrassment, but from anger, too. This wasn't about the value of what I got. It was about feeling like the family joke once again. Laugh all you want, but it's from Grandma, and I'm taking it. I muttered, trying to sound like I didn't care. But their joke stung like a rusty bolt that refuses to turn. I've never been a family success story. No wife, no kids, still living in the same town where I grew up. Maybe that's why they consider me the loser of the bunch. I wasn't going to sit there and take it all evening. I grabbed the quilt, nodded at Mr. Peterson, and walked out while they were still chuckling and making comments about how I could start a sewing circle. In my car, I tossed the quilt on the passenger seat and just sat there for a minute, staring at the steering wheel. The spring evening was turning chilly, and I could feel a breeze coming through the slightly open window. The quilt just sat there, this bundle of faded cloth that was apparently my inheritance after 42 years of birthday cards and Christmas visits. "Why this, Grandma?" I said out loud to my empty car. "What's the joke I'm missing here?" I half expected the old woman to be laughing from heaven, enjoying some private joke at my expense. It wouldn't have been out of character. Grandma Edna had a wicked sense of humor, but something about this didn't feel like a joke. It felt intentional somehow. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the quilt, in the dim light of passing street lamps, The patchwork pattern almost seemed to shift and change. One patch in particular caught my eye, a dark blue square that seemed oddly geometric compared to the others. But then again, I was tired and emotional, and the light was playing tricks. My house isn't much, a small 2-bedroom on the edge of town that I bought 15 years ago when the housing market crashed. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine, and I've slowly made it comfortable over the years. Walking in, I flipped on the lights and tossed my keys into the bowl by the door. I dropped the quilt on my couch and went straight to the fridge for a beer. The day had been long, and all I wanted was to forget about family dynamics and disappointing inheritances for a while. Sitting on my recliner, I clicked on the TV and tried to focus on the baseball game, but my eyes kept drifting to Quilt. It looked so out of place on my plain brown couch, this ancient, handmade thing among my decidedly modern, if cheap, furniture. The contrast was almost funny. After finishing my beer, curiosity got the better of me. I set down the empty bottle and walked over to the couch. Unfolding the quilt, I spread it out fully for the first time. It was bigger than I expected, probably enough to cover a double bed. The craftsmanship, now that I was looking more closely, was actually pretty impressive. Tiny, even stitches held together dozens of different fabric pieces. Some floral, some striped, others solid colors or small patterns. The quilt lay there on my couch, looking completely out of place on my bachelor pad with faded patches and hand-stitched edges. I ran my fingers over the different fabrics. Some rough cotton, others silky, a few that felt like old shirt material. How many stories were woven into this thing? I remembered Grandma working on quilts when I was a kid, though I wasn't sure if this was one of those or something even older. She always said quilts weren't just for keeping warm. They were for keeping memories. I grabbed another beer and sat down next to the quilt, absently tracing the patterns with my finger. What was Grandma Edna thinking? Everyone else got something valuable. A house, money, a truck, and I got this old blanket that probably wasn't worth more than the sentimental value attached to it. And even that felt questionable given how little time we'd spent together in her final years. The TV droned on in the background, but I wasn't really watching it anymore. My mind kept circling back to the reading of the will, the laughter, the jokes at my expense. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was a family loser, the unmarried mechanic with grease permanently embedded in his fingerprints and not much to show for his 4 decades on Earth. But something about this didn't sit right. Grandma Edna wasn't cruel. She wouldn't have given me a worthless item just to make me look bad. There had to be more to it. I picked up the quilt and examined it more carefully, looking at the patterns, the stitching, even checking if anything was sewn into the hem. Nothing seemed unusual or out of place. It was just an old, well-made quilt from the 1930s. Why this, Grandma? I asked aloud to my empty living room. What am I missing here? I folded the quilt neatly and placed it on the end of my couch. Maybe tomorrow it would make more sense. Or maybe I'd just donate it somewhere and try to forget this whole embarrassing episode. As I got ready for bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this inheritance than met the eye. Grandma Edna had always been shrewd, observant, and occasionally mysterious. She didn't do things without reason. Why me? Why the quilt? I muttered as I turned off the lights and headed to my bedroom. The questions followed me into my dreams, where I saw Grandma Edna smiling that knowing smile of hers, like she was waiting for me to figure something out. A couple days after we were reading, I found myself sitting at home with the quilt. I'd tossed it on the couch that night, but now it was spread across my coffee table, challenging me to figure out why Grandma Edna had left it to me, of all people. Something about it was bugging me like an old song stuck in my head. I was about to fold it up and put it away somewhere when the morning light hit it differently through my blinds, making the faded colors pop in a way I hadn't noticed before. That's when I saw it. The hexagonal patches weren't just random pieces sewn together. They formed a pattern, but not the kind you'd expect on a quilt. The red patches clustered together like hills or ridges. The blue ones created a winding path that looked suspiciously like a river. The green patches spread out in what could only be fields. And there, in the corner, was a small cross-stitched X in black thread. I sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. This wasn't just a quilt. This looked like a map. My mind flashed back to when I was 12, staying with Grandma Edna during summer break. She was working on a quilt, her wrinkled hands moving with surprising precision as she added stitch after stitch. "This quilt is a memory of what we lost, Simon," she had said. At 12, I thought she meant the good old days or something equally boring. But now her words hit me like a hammer on a thumb. What if she meant something specific? Something literal that had been lost? My dad used to say, everything in life makes sense if you dig deep enough. He was talking about car engines at the time, but maybe the old man had a point beyond mechanics. I spread the quilt fully across the living room floor and turned on every lamp I had, now that I was looking for it. The pattern was unmistakable. Red patches forming highlands, blue creating a river, green patches spreading out in what looked like farmland, and that X marking what? A spot? Something buried? Then another memory surfaced. Grandma Edna used to tell stories about my father's lost land. I'd always assumed it was just another tall tale from her seemingly endless supply of family folklore. Something about land the family had owned during the Depression, but lost somehow. What if this wasn't just a quilt? What if it was actually a map to something real? I found myself laughing out loud in my empty living room. If this is a treasure map, then I'm either Sherlock Holmes or a fool with a rag. My voice sounded strange in Quiet House. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. There was something here. Something Grandma wanted me to find. Why else give me this specific quilt when everyone else got things of obvious value? I grabbed my laptop and started searching for Nebraska land records and how to read old property maps. The results weren't very helpful. I needed actual historical records, not some random website explaining how property lines work. Then I remembered that our county kept archives of all property transactions going back to the late 1800s. They digitized some of it in recent years, but the older stuff was still on paper and microfilm. If there was any truth to this crazy idea, that's where I'd need to look. I studied that quilt until my eyes hurt, finding more details with each pass. Tiny brown stitches that might be roads, small clusters of white patches that could be buildings or towns. And along what I now definitely thought was a river, there were small purple patches that made no sense at all. The more I looked, the more convinced I became that this wasn't random. This was deliberate. This was a message from my grandmother, and somehow she decided I was the one who needed to receive it. But why me? I'm no historian or detective. I fix alternators and replace timing belts for a living. The most mysterious thing I typically encounter is why someone's check engine light keeps coming on after I've replaced every sensor in their car. That night, I dreamed of Grandma Edna, sitting in her old rocking chair with the quilt. When I asked what it meant, she just smiled and said, "You'll know when you see it, Simon. Some things can't stay buried forever." I woke up early, her words echoing in my head. It felt real, important, like she was still trying to tell me something. Unable to fall back asleep, I searched online for my great-grandfather's name along with Nebraska and land dispute. I found a mention of a Reynolds property dispute in a digitized newspaper from 1934, but the full article was behind a paywall. But it was enough to convince me I wasn't completely off base. As morning light filtered through my blinds, I made a decision. I needed to know if this quilt was what I thought it was. I called the garage and told Mike I needed a personal day. He wasn't happy. We had a full schedule, but I rarely asked for time off, so he grudgingly agreed. After showering and barely touching my breakfast, I carefully folded the quilt and placed it in a clean bag for protection. The county records office opened at 8:30, and I planned to be there when the doors unlocked. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of genuine excitement. Maybe Grandma Edna hadn't made me the butt of a family joke after all. Maybe she'd given me a mystery to solve. The county clerk's office smelled exactly like you'd expect. Old papers, industrial carpet that hadn't been replaced since the 90s, and coffee that had been sitting in the same pot since 7 a.m. A bell jingled weakly as I pushed open the glass door. The quilt tucked safely under my arm in its protective bag. The place wasn't exactly buzzing with activity. Just a middle-aged guy in a corner filling out forms and a bored-looking security guard thumbing through his phone. Behind the main counter sat a woman about 35, with chestnut hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. When she looked up at me, her smile had that patient quality of someone who deals with confused citizens all day but hasn't completely lost her enthusiasm for helping them. "Can I help you?" she asked, closing the folder she'd been flipping through. I suddenly realized how ridiculous my mission must sound. I'm researching some family property records from the 1930s. My great-grandfather had land in Oklahoma, but everything got lost during the Dust Bowl years. She raised an eyebrow slightly, and I could tell this wasn't the usual request for a marriage license or property tax form. Any specific county or township? Kingfisher County, I think. I hesitated before adding, I don't have much to go on besides family stories, and well, this... I patted the plastic bag containing Grandma Edna's quilt. "I'm Kate," she said, extending her hand across the counter. "Records from the 30s are mostly on microfilm, but we've digitized a lot. What's your great-grandfather's name?" "Jonathan Kelly," I replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm and her hand warm. "And you are—" Her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled. Simon Reynolds." I suddenly felt self-conscious about the engine grease permanently embedded in my fingernails. "I'm a mechanic over at Mike's garage." "Well, Simon Reynolds, a mechanic. I've seen treasure hunters come through here before, usually chasing mineral rights or forgotten bank accounts." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "But you're the first one who brought a quilt as evidence." "Follow me." There was something about the way she said it, not mocking but amused and intrigued, that made me feel less like an idiot and more like someone on an actual adventure. Kate led me to a back room where several computer terminals sat alongside old-school microfilm readers. The space was cramped but organized, with filing cabinets lining the walls and a large map of the state hanging above them. "So what's the story with Quilt?" she asked as she logged into a database. I unfolded it carefully on an empty desk, spreading it out so the pattern was visible. "My grandmother left it to me when she died last month. The rest of the family thought it was worthless, but I noticed the pattern looks like a map." Kate leaned over my shoulder to examine it, close enough that I could smell her shampoo. Something citrusy. You know, you might be onto something. See how these blue patches form a line? That could be the Cimarron River, which runs through Kingfisher County." I hadn't expected her to take my crazy theory seriously, let alone contribute to it. For the first time since the reading, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely out of my mind. For the next hour, Kate and I dug through digital archives and old counter records. She knew the system inside and out, navigating through databases and file codes that would have taken me days to figure out. Occasionally, she'd stop and point something out on the quilt, matching it to features on old survey maps of the region. "Your grandmother must have been quite something," Kate commented as we waited for a particularly ancient file to load. "To preserve a family history like this, in a way that would survive when papers might not." I thought about Grandma Edna, with her sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude. Yeah, she was pretty crafty. In more ways than one, apparently. Kate laughed at my pun, a genuine laugh that made me stand a little straighter. It had been a while since I'd made anyone laugh like that. The computer chimed, and Kate leaned forward. "Here we go. Land records for Kingfisher County, 1932. Her finger traced down the screen. Kelly, Jonathan Kelly, here it is." My heart actually skipped when she pointed to the entry. There was in black and white. "Jonathan Kelly, owner of 80 acres in Township 16 North, Range 7 West." Can we see exactly where it was? I asked, suddenly eager. Kate clicked on a few more links, bringing up a scan of an old plat map. "This section here," she said, pointing to a square on the grid. "Does that match your quilt map?" I laid the quilt beside the screen, and there was no denying it. The landmarks lined up, the river, the small rise of hills to the north, even what appeared to be a road running along the eastern edge. "What happened to the land?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level despite the excitement building in my chest. Kate dug deeper, pulling up tax records and transfer deeds. According to this, the property taxes went unpaid from 1933 to 1935. Not surprising with the Depression and the Dust Bowl hitting that area hard. She pulled up another record. Here it is. The land was seized for back taxes, but then she frowned, scanning the document. That's strange. It was classified as unclaimed after your great-grandfather's death. No heir came forward to claim it or pay the back taxes. Unclaimed? I repeated. Is that normal? Not really. Usually there's a probate process, and the land would pass to the next of kin. She kept reading. According to this note, there was some question about the deed itself, something about a boundary dispute with neighboring properties. The county held it in limbo, and then she trailed off, clicking through more records. And then I prompted when she didn't continue. Then nothing. It's like the whole issue was just forgotten. She looked up at me, her professional demeanor giving way to what seemed like genuine intrigue. Simon, if no one ever properly resolved the claim, and if you can prove you're Jonathan Kelly's heir, I could claim the land? The idea seemed absurd, like something out of a cable TV movie. Potentially. It would be complicated, and you'd need a lawyer who specializes in property law. But stranger things have happened. She was getting excited now, too, her eyes bright as she pulled up more documents. Especially since Oklahoma has a 7-year dormant mineral rights law, but that only applies if someone else has been working the land. And according to this, she showed me another screen with more recent satellite imagery. The parcel in question appeared to be vacant land, with what looked like scrub vegetation and perhaps a few trees. Is there anything on the land now? I asked, peering at the blurry image. Hard to tell from these images. They're not high resolution for rural areas. She zoomed in as much as the system would allow. Doesn't look like there's any structure. Might just be empty field. I stared at the screen, then back at the quilt. Why would Grandma Edna go to all this trouble for a worthless patch of Oklahoma dirt? There had to be more to it. What's this? Kate suddenly pointed to a small notation on one of the older documents. I leaned in to look where her finger was indicating. In faded type, there was a note. Mineral survey incomplete. Filed separately under KF 1934 MS. Kate was already typing the reference number into the search field. Mineral surveys were common in that area. Oil was big business, even during the Depression. The system churned for a moment before bringing up another document. This one a hand-drawn map with various notations. Is that what I think it is? I asked, not daring to believe it. Kate nodded slowly. It's a preliminary oil survey from 1934. They were checking the entire county for potential drilling sites. She studied the document closely. According to this, they found indications of oil on several properties in that township, including... Her finger traced across the map to a familiar square, including your great-grandfather's land. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Oil? Are you saying there might be oil on that land? I'm saying they thought there might be back in 1934. Whether there is or not, and whether it would be worth anything today, is another question entirely. She gave me a cautious look. Don't go planning your retirement yet. But my mind was already racing. If there was even a possibility of oil on that land, and if I could somehow claim ownership after all these years. No wonder Grandma Edna had preserved the location in her quilt. This wasn't just about family history. This could be an actual inheritance, worth far more than a house or a pickup truck. I must have had a pretty transparent expression, because Kate laughed softly. I can see those dollar signs in your eyes, Simon. But like I said, this would be complicated. You'd need to prove you're the rightful heir, deal with 90 years of back taxes, and probably fight off any other claims that might come out of the woodwork if word got out about potential oil. Right. I said, trying to rein in my imagination. Of course. But it's still worth looking into, right? Absolutely, Kate agreed. She jotted down some information on a notepad. Here's the exact location based on the township and range numbers. And here's the reference numbers for all the documents we found today. If you really want to pursue this, Your next step will be visiting Kingfisher County offices in Oklahoma. They'd have more detailed records about the current status of the land. She handed me the paper, her fingers brushing against mine. And maybe take pictures of that quilt. It's pretty amazing evidence of your family connection to the property. I carefully folded the quilt and put it back in its protective bag, along with the notes Kate had given me. For the first time since Grandma Edna's funeral, I felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about proving something to my smirking relatives anymore. This was about reclaiming a piece of my family's history, and possibly a whole lot more. I can't thank you enough for your help, I told Kate sincerely. Most people would have thought I was crazy, coming in with a quilt and a half-baked theory. She smiled, and I noticed a small dimple in her left cheek. It's the most interesting thing that's happened in this office in months. Honestly, I should be thanking you for breaking up the monotony of marriage licenses and property tax disputes. As I gathered my things to leave, Kate hesitated, then grabbed another piece of paper and scribbled something on it. Here's my number, in case you have any more questions about the records. I took the paper, noticing it had both the office number and, written slightly smaller beneath it, a cell number. I'd like to know how this turns out, she added. It's not every day you get to be part of a treasure hunt. I tucked the paper into my pocket, suddenly aware that I wasn't just thinking about the land anymore. There was something about Kate, her enthusiasm, her intelligence, the way she'd taken my wild ideas seriously. That had me more intrigued than I've been by anyone in a long time. I'll definitely keep you updated. I promised. Back in my truck, I sat for a moment with the engine off, processing everything I'd learned. The quilt lay on the passenger seat, its secret now partially revealed. I ran my fingers over the stitches that marked the Cimarron River, the careful patches that represented my great-grandfather's land. I had decisions to make now. A trip to Oklahoma wasn't something I could do on a whim. I'd need time off work, money for gas and motels, and probably consult with a lawyer who knew something about inherited property. But underneath the practical considerations, there was a growing excitement I hadn't felt in years. This was adventure. This was mystery. This was something that mattered. And if I was being honest with myself, the prospect of having a reason to contact Kate again wasn't exactly a downside either. I turned the key in the ignition, my mind already mapping out the route to Oklahoma. The quilt had led me this far, to archives and records I never would have found on my own. But the real question now was what I'd find when I actually saw the land. Would it just be an empty field, valuable only for what might lie beneath it? Or was there something more, some other reason Grandma Edna had been so determined to pass this information down? I pulled out of the parking lot, the quilt secure beside me. My GPS was already calculating the fastest route to Kingfisher County, Oklahoma. It would be a long drive, about 8 hours each way. Not something I could do today. But soon, as I drove home, my thoughts were filled not just with maps and land deeds, but with Kate's smile as she'd handed me her number. Whatever treasure might be waiting in Oklahoma, I'd already found something unexpected right here in Nebraska. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of determination I hadn't felt since I decided to rebuild my first engine at 17. I'd taken the rest of the week off in the garage. Mike wasn't thrilled, but I had vacation days stockpiled like a doomsday prepper hoards canned beans. 8 hours to Oklahoma, I figured. If I left by 7, I could be there by mid-afternoon. I'd packed light, just a duffel with a couple changes of clothes, my toothbrush, and the all-important quilt, carefully folded in its protective bag. As I loaded up my truck, my neighbor Carl wandered over, coffee mug in hand and curiosity written all over his face. "Road trip?" he asked, eyeing my minimal luggage. "Something like that," I replied, not ready to explain the whole treasure hunt situation. Carl was the kind of guy who'd either think I was crazy or insist on coming along. The drive from Nebraska to Oklahoma is exactly as exciting as it sounds, which is to say, it's about as thrilling as watching paint dry in slow motion. Endless fields of corn and wheat, punctuated by the occasional gas station or truck stop. I had 8 hours to think about what I might find, 8 hours for my expectations to build and my doubts to creep in. What if this was all just a wild goose chase? What if the land had been developed decades ago? What if I got there and found a Walmart parking lot? To keep my sanity, I alternated between classic rock stations and calling Kate with updates. She seemed genuinely invested in my journey, offering encouragement and legal tidbits she discovered after I left. The mineral rights reversion clause in Oklahoma law is fascinating, she said during our third call. If no one's been extracting resources, those rights typically stay with the original deed. I stopped for lunch at a roadside diner that looked like it hadn't changed its menu since 1975. The waitress called me honey and brought me a slice of pie on the house because I looked like I was on a mission. If only she knew. By 3 p.m., I was following my GPS down increasingly narrow roads in Kingfisher County. The landscape had changed. Less corn, more scrubby grassland, and the occasional oil derrick pumping away in the distance. My heart jumped a little each time I spotted one of those nodding metal giants. Could my great-grandfather's forgotten patch of dust actually sit on top of a jackpot? The final turn took me onto a dirt road that seemed to stretch into nowhere. According to both my GPS and the coordinates Kate had given me, my destination was about a half-mile down this road, just past a stand of cottonwood trees. I pulled over where the coordinates indicated, double-checking against the survey map I'd printed out. This was it. This was the 80 acres that had once belonged to Jonathan Kelly, my great-grandfather, and it was nothing special, just a vast expanse of weeds, scrub brush, and dust stretching toward the horizon. No buildings, no markers, nothing to indicate it ever been owned or worked by anyone. Just open land under the endless Oklahoma sky, with a few scattered trees providing the only vertical interest. I got out of my truck, the quilt tucked under my arm, and stood there feeling like the world's biggest fool. What had I expected? A sign saying Simon's Inheritance, with an arrow pointing buried treasure? The wind kicked up, sending little dust devils spinning across the barren ground. I unfolded the quilt, holding it up to match the landscape against the pattern. The blue stitching did indeed match the small creek bed I could see winding through the property. The elevated patches corresponded to a slight rise in the land to the north. Grandma Edna's map was accurate. This was definitely the place. But why? Why preserve the location of this unremarkable patch of nowhere? That's when I heard it, a low, mechanical humming in the distance. I turned and spotted what I'd missed on my drive-in. Just over the next rise, maybe 2 miles away, the distinctive silhouettes of oil drilling rigs stood against the sky, their constant motion creating that persistent hum. Oil? Seriously? My heart started racing. Could that be what this was all about? Was Grandma Edna's quilt map leading me to a potential oil field? The possibility seemed both absurd and increasingly plausible. I wandered the property for about an hour, trying to get a feel for the land. There wasn't much to see, just scrubby vegetation. A few rabbits that darted away at my approach, and that persistent hum of drilling in the distance. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The mineral survey Kate and I had found in the archives, the unclaimed status of the land, the careful preservation of its location in a form that would survive decades. As the sun began to dip lower, I decided to investigate those drilling operations. If anyone could tell me about the oil potential in this area, it would be the people actively extracting it nearby. I drove my truck toward the drilling site, noting that it was on what appeared to be neighboring land. As I approached, a security guard stopped me, looking understandably suspicious of a random guy in a pickup showing up unannounced. After explaining that I was researching family property nearby, he reluctantly directed me to the site office, a double-wide trailer set up about 100 yards from the nearest rig. Inside, I found a bearded man in a hard hat poring over maps spread across a folding table. He introduced himself as Mike Donovan, the lead geologist for Heartland Energy. When I explained my situation and showed him both the quilt and the copies of the land records, his initial skepticism gave way to genuine interest. "Mind if I take a look at those coordinates again?" he asked, turning to his computer. He pulled up a detailed geological survey map of the area and zoomed in on my 80 acres. Then he looked at me with newfound respect. "Well, I'll be damned. Your property sits right on the Woodford Shale Formation. We've been extracting about 2 miles east, but our surveys indicate the deposit extends throughout this region." My blank expression must have been obvious, because he continued in layman's terms. It's a significant oil and natural gas deposit. If your claim to that land is legitimate, mineral rights and all, you're sitting on a potential gold mine. Black gold, that is. I tried to keep my voice steady. How significant are we talking? He leaned back in his chair. Can't say for sure without proper surveys and test wells. But based on what we're pulling from similar acreage nearby, we're talking initial bonuses in the tens of thousands and royalty payments that could run from 5 to 6 figures monthly, depending on production levels and market prices. I must have looked like I was about to pass out, because he quickly added, "Don't go counting your millions just yet. You got a legal maze to navigate first. Establishing clear title after all these years won't be simple." He was right, of course. But for the first time, I could see why Grandma Edna had been so determined to pass this information down. This wasn't just about family history. This was about securing a future. I thanked Mike for his time and headed back to my truck, my mind spinning with possibilities. I needed to get back to Nebraska to talk to Kate, to find a lawyer who specialized in mineral rights and property claims. I checked into a small motel in Kingfisher for the night, then spent hours on my phone researching Oklahoma property law and calling Kate with updates. She was as excited as I was, her legal mind already jumping ahead to the challenges we'd face. "The fact that no one else has claimed it in all these years works in your favor," she said. "But you'll need to establish a clear chain of inheritance from Jonathan Kelly to you. That would be the tricky part. I'd need birth certificates, death certificates, wills, documentation spanning nearly a century and multiple generations." I slept fitfully that night, dreams of oil derricks and family trees blending together in my subconscious. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I'd head back to Nebraska, gather whatever family documents I could find, and start the legal process to claim what might rightfully be mine. The drive back seemed quicker, fueled by adrenaline and possibility. As soon as I hit cell reception, I called Kate. "I need your help with the property records again," I told her, "and maybe a recommendation for a good lawyer." "Come straight to the office," she replied. "I've already pulled some additional documents you might need." Kate had gone above and beyond, working after hours to dig up every possible record related to my great-grandfather and the land in question. When I arrived, bleary-eyed from the long drive, she had stacks of printouts waiting. "You're amazing," I told her, genuinely touched by her dedication to my cause. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's not every day you get to help uncover a family legacy. Plus, the legal puzzles are fascinating." We spent hours going through everything she'd found. Property transfers from the 1920s, tax records, even an old newspaper clipping about Jonathan Kelly winning a farming prize before the Dust Bowl hit. "You know," Kate said, looking up from a particularly ancient deed record, "you've owed me a coffee since yesterday." I couldn't help but smile. "Only if you'll join me." "That was the idea," she replied with that dimpled smile I was growing increasingly fond of. Over the next few weeks, my life transformed into a weird balancing act between my regular job at the garage and my new part-time career as a wannabe oil baron. I found a lawyer named Patricia Henderson who specialized in energy law and complex property claims. Her office was in Oklahoma City, but she agreed to handle most things remotely, with occasional in-person meetings when necessary. "This is one of the more interesting cases I've seen," Patricia told me during our first consultation. "The land has been essentially forgotten for almost a century, but the mineral rights are potentially worth millions." She laid out a battle plan, established my direct lineage to Jonathan Kelly, filed a claim of inheritance based on Grandma Edna's will, and petitioned the court to recognize my ownership of both the land and its mineral rights. "Your grandmother's will is key here," Patricia explained. "The fact that she specifically left you this quilt, which demonstrably maps to this property, strengthens your claim considerably." Meanwhile, my relationship with Kate continued to develop. What started as coffee turned into lunches, then dinners, then weekend hikes through the Nebraska countryside. She was smart, funny, and seemed genuinely impressed by my determination to see this through. "Most people would have laughed off that quilt as a worthless heirloom," she told me one evening as we walked along the river. "You saw the puzzle inside it." "I'm stubborn," I replied with a shrug. Ask anyone at the garage. It's my defining quality. I prefer to call it persistence, she said, taking my hand. It's actually quite attractive. If finding the land felt like a victory, having Kate's hand in mine felt like winning a championship. The legal process moved at the pace you'd expect, somewhere between a snail and a glacier. But Patricia was thorough, and by the third month, we had assembled an ironclad case. Birth certificates connected me directly to Jonathan Kelly. Grandma Edna's will specifically left me any and all property and possessions she owned, which Patricia argued included her knowledge of and claim to the Oklahoma land. The quilt, with its unmistakable map, provided physical evidence of that knowledge and intent. Most importantly, no one else had laid claim to property or its mineral rights in over 80 years. It was, in legal terms, abandoned property, but with a clear heir now stepping forward. The court date in Oklahoma was set for early October. Kate took a rare day off work to accompany me, claiming she needed to see this through after all the paperwork. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, reviewed our case with methodical care. When she finally looked up, her expression was unreadable. In my 30 years on the bench, I've never seen a quilt submitted as evidence in property claim, she said. But I must admit, the documentation is compelling and the chain of inheritance is clear. She ruled in my favor, granting me full ownership of the land and all associated mineral rights. Subject only to payment of current property taxes, the back taxes have been wiped out decades ago under Oklahoma's property tax limitation laws. As we left the courthouse, Patricia was already on her phone. I have 3 energy companies who want to talk about leasing the mineral rights. They've been watching this case closely. Within a week, I was reviewing offers. Heartland Energy, the company already drilling nearby, made the most attractive proposal, a signing bonus of $50,000 and royalty payments estimated between $50,000 and $75,000 monthly, depending on production. The field was vast, they explained, with excellent production forecasts. They'd handle all drilling and extraction. I'd just received checks. It was surreal. One signature would transform me from a mechanic living paycheck to someone with serious money. All because Grandma Edna had encoded a family secret into a quilt that everyone else had dismissed as worthless. I signed the agreement on a Tuesday afternoon in Patricia's office. As the Heartland Energy representative shook my hand, I couldn't help thinking about that while reading just a few months ago. The laughter, the jokes, the pity. We'll begin preparations immediately, the rep was saying. First payment should hit your account within 30 days. I nodded, still in a daze. I'd open a new bank account just for this purpose, not quite believing it would ever see that kind of deposit. As I left the office, my phone started ringing. I checked the screen. It was my cousin Travis. Strange, since we hardly ever spoke outside of family gatherings. Then another call came in. Aunt Marge. Then Uncle Bob. Word had gotten out. I silenced my phone, which was now buzzing like a Black Friday sale at Walmart. Whatever my family wanted, it could wait until I'd had time to process everything that had just happened. I finally turned my phone back on while sitting in a diner just outside Oklahoma City. It immediately exploded with notifications. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, and enough voicemails to fill an audiobook. I scrolled through them as I sipped my coffee, unsurprised by what I found. Aunt Marge. Simon, we need to talk about this Oklahoma situation. We're family. This inheritance belongs to all of us. Uncle Bob, call me back ASAP. This isn't just your windfall. Don't be greedy. Travis. Hey, cuz, about that quilt thing. We were just joking around. Let's discuss how to split this fairly. Even distant relatives I barely spoke to were suddenly reaching out with warm greetings and reminiscences about family gatherings from decades ago. Amazing how the prospect of oil money could jog people's memories of our supposed closeness. I set the phone down and stared out the window at the Oklahoma plains rolling by. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, I'd stood in Grandma Edna's living room holding that worthless quilt while my family laughed. Now, they were falling over themselves trying to claim a piece of what it had led to. Kate called while I was driving back to Nebraska, and I filled her in on the family drama. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing for now," I replied. "I've got all the legal documentation. The court recognized my claim. The agreement is signed. There's nothing they can do except guilt trip me. And is it working? The guilt trip?" I thought about it for a moment, not even a little bit. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, Aunt Marge's SUV was parked in front of my house. Great. I barely had time to process everything myself, and now I had to deal with a family ambush. She was sitting on my porch steps, looking simultaneously angry and trying to seem welcoming. As I got out of my truck, she stood up and smoothed her pants, as if preparing for battle. I decided to head this off before it could devolve into a shouting match. "And Marge!" I just drove 8 hours straight. "Whatever this is about, it'll have to wait until tomorrow." She wasn't having it. "This is about family, Simon. You can't just claim Edna's legacy for yourself. That land belongs to all of us. We're all Kellys by blood." I couldn't help but laugh, which only made her expression darken. Funny how it's suddenly our legacy now. 3 months ago, it was just a worthless old rag, remember? You got the house. Bob got the savings. Travis got the truck. Nobody wanted the quilt. Her face flushed. "We didn't know. How could we have known?" "Grandma knew," I said quietly. "She knew exactly what she was doing when she left me that quilt. She knew who would value it for more than just what it might be worth." Aunt Marge switched tactics, her voice softening. "Simon, honey, we're talking about millions of dollars over time. You can't possibly need all that money. Don't you think Edna would want you to share with the family?" I thought about Grandma Edna, about how she'd carefully preserve her father's legacy in that quilt, creating a map that would survive when papers might not, how she'd specifically chosen me as its recipient, how the rest of the family had mocked that choice. "I think," I said slowly, "that Grandma would want her wishes respected. She gave specific inheritances to specific people. You didn't question getting the house, did you? Or suggest splitting its value with me?" Aunt Marge sputtered for a moment before gathering herself. "That's different. The house was worth maybe $200,000. We're talking about millions here. So it's about the amount? If the quilt had led to $1,000, you wouldn't be here." She didn't have an answer for that. We both knew the truth. I softened my tone. "Look, I'm exhausted. I need time to think about everything. This has been a whirlwind, and I'm still processing it all." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but short of making a scene in the middle of the neighborhood, there wasn't much else she could do. She left with a chilly, "We'll talk about this later," that promised future confrontations. True to form, the family didn't give up easily. Over the next few weeks, I received everything from heartfelt appeals to thinly veiled threats of legal action. Uncle Bob claimed Grandma had verbally promised him everything she owned years ago. Travis suggested we could work something out that would benefit everyone. Even distant cousins I hadn't seen since childhood crawled out of the woodwork with their hands out. Patricia assured me their claims had no legal standing. The will was clear, the court ruling is solid, and the contract is signed. They have no case. Kate was more direct in her assessment. "They're vultures. They laughed at you, and now they want what you found." She was right, of course. But family is complicated, and part of me wondered what Grandma Edna would want me to do. Would she expect me to share? Or had she specifically chosen this path, knowing exactly how it would play out? I remembered something she told me when I was maybe 14 or 15. "What's valuable isn't what shines brightest, but what you take care to preserve." At the time, I thought she was talking about her collection of depression glass. Now, I understood she'd been passing down a deeper wisdom. My family hadn't preserved her memory or respected her wishes. They divided up her possessions based on obvious value and laughed at the one thing she'd most carefully preserved. The first royalty payment arrived exactly 30 days after signing the contract, just as promised. $63,472.18, deposited directly into my new account. I stared at the balance on my phone screen for a full minute, hardly believing it was real. This wasn't lottery winner money, but it was life-changing for a small-town mechanic whose idea of splurging had previously been ordering the steak instead of the burger at the local diner. I called Kate as soon as I saw the deposit. "It's real," was all I could say when she answered. "Of course it's real," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "You earned this, Simon. Not just the money, but the validation. You were right when everyone else was wrong." Kate had become my rock through this whole process. Her belief in me had never wavered. From that first day in the county records office when I'd shown up with a quilt and a wild theory. Over the past months, our relationship had deepened from professional acquaintances to friends to something much more. That night, we celebrated with dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town, which, this being Nebraska, meant a steakhouse where the servers wore ties and the wine list had more than 3 options. As we toasted with actual champagne, a first for me, I found myself looking at Kate and realizing I'd found something far more valuable than oil rights. "What?" she asked, catching me staring. "I'm just thinking that Grandma Edna's quilt led me to more than one treasure." Kate blushed, something I'd rarely seen her do. That was simultaneously the sweetest and corniest thing anyone's ever said to me. "I'm a simple mechanic." I shrugged. "Fancy words are my strong suit." "I like your words just fine," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Over the next few months, the royalty payments continued to arrive like clockwork, sometimes higher, sometimes lower, but averaging around $60,000 per month. It was surreal. I kept working at the garage, partly because I enjoyed it and partly because I didn't know what else to do with myself. Mike joked that I was the only millionaire who still changed oil for a living. The family pressure eventually subsided, not because I gave up, but because I stopped engaging. I didn't answer the calls or respond to the guilt-trippy text messages. Eventually, they got the message, or at least realized their tactics weren't working. Kate and I grew closer. 6 months after that first royalty check, I asked her to move in with me. 3 months after that, on a weekend trip to the Grand Canyon, something neither of us had ever seen before, I proposed at sunrise with a view that made even my oil money seem insignificant. We got married in the spring, a simple ceremony in a renovated barn outside of town. I invited the family, expecting most to decline out of lingering resentment. To my surprise, most of them came. Money might have driven a wedge between us initially, but time has a way of healing wounds, or at least scabbing them over enough to be polite at a wedding. With the steady income from the oil rights, Kate and I bought a beautiful house on the edge of town, nothing ostentatious but spacious, with a view of fields that reminded me of the Oklahoma plains where this all started. In the main living room, I hung Grandma Edna's quilt in a custom-built display case, illuminated softly to preserve the fabric. It was both a family heirloom and a daily reminder of how our lives had changed. Kate quit her job at the county office and started her own legal consulting business, focusing on helping people navigate property rights and inheritance issues. "There are more stories like yours out there," she told me. "More people who don't know what they might be entitled to." I continued working at the garage part-time, more as a hobby than a necessity now. The routine kept me grounded when everything else in my life had transformed so completely. The money kept flowing, $50,000 to $75,000 every month, just as the contract had promised. After the first year, we had more than we knew what to do with. We'd paid off all our debts, bought the house, set up solid investments for the future, and still the account kept growing. I thought a lot about Grandma Edna during that time, about what she would want me to do with this windfall that had come from her foresight and care, about the stories she told of growing up during the Dust Bowl, when so many farm families lost everything. That's when the idea came to me. Kate and I were sitting on our back porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. She was sketching out plans for a home office, and I was nursing a beer, my mind wandering. "I want to do something with the money," I said suddenly, "something that would make Grandma proud." Kate set down her pencil. "What are you thinking?" "A foundation. The Edna Kelly Foundation, to help farming families in crisis, drought, floods, economic hardship, whatever. The kind of help that wasn't available when her family lost their land." Kate's face lit up. "That's perfect, Simon. A way to honor where the money came from in the first place." Within a month, We'd hired a lawyer who specialized in nonprofits, not Patricia this time. This was outside her expertise, and begun the process of establishing the foundation. I seeded it with $200,000 from the royalty payments, with a commitment to fund it annually with a percentage of the ongoing income. The first grant went to a family in western Nebraska whose farm had been devastated by a flash flood. The second to a young couple trying to establish a sustainable organic farm, but struggling with startup costs. With each grant, I included a letter explaining who Edna Kelly was and how her story had made these funds possible. Sometimes at night, I'd stand in front of the framed quilt and think about the hands that stitched it. Grandma Edna as a young woman, preserving her father's legacy in the only way available to her at the time. I'd whisper, "Thank you, Grandma," to the silent house. Her love and foresight had given me not just financial security, but also Kate, and now a purpose for all this unexpected wealth. The family eventually came around, in their way, not with apologies, exactly, but with awkward attempts at reconciliation. Aunt Marge sent holiday cards. Uncle Bob called occasionally with strained small talk. Travis texted now and then, "Any chance you're hosting Thanksgiving this year? Would love to see the new place." Kate and I would laugh about these transparent attempts to get back in my good graces. "Tell them they're welcome any time," she'd joke, "as long as they bring their own quilt and a check for the foundation." Life settled into a new normal. The oil kept pumping, the royalty checks kept coming, and Kate and I built our life together. We talked about children, about travel, about all the doors that had opened because of one old quilt that everyone else had dismissed. Your grandmother was playing matchmaker from beyond the grave. Kate would tease. She knew exactly what she was doing, giving you the treasure map that would lead you right to the county records office. Maybe she was right. Maybe Grandma Edna had seen something in me that would recognize a value in what others overlooked. Or maybe she just trusted me to respect her wishes and preserve her father's legacy. The oil won't last forever. Eventually, the wells will run dry, the royalty payments will stop, and life will change again. But the foundation will continue, and so will the story of Edna Kelly and her remarkable quilt. A story I'll pass down to our children and they to theirs. Sometimes I think about that while reading, about standing there embarrassed while my family laugh at my inheritance, about how quickly fortunes can change, how what seems worthless one day can be priceless the next, about how the true value of things isn't always obvious at first glance. Life, I've learned, is a lot like that quilt, patched together from different experiences, some bright and some faded, some smooth and some rough. It might look worn or unremarkable on the surface, but look deeper and you might find a map to treasure. I wonder what forgotten treasures are hiding in your family's closets, waiting for someone to look past the surface and discover their true worth. Maybe it's a quilt, a faded photograph, or a story told by a grandparent that no one else bothered to remember. Whatever it is, I hope you find it before it's too late, because sometimes the things others laugh at turn out to be the most valuable of all.